I found out my boyfriend has an OnlyFans. Welcome to The Confessional, the series where you guys send me your confessions through Instagram and I tell them here on TikTok so that you can get some genuine advice. Do I even have to say a disclaimer? This is obviously not my story time. It was sent to me. My boyfriend and I have been together for 3 years. I thought we were definitely gonna get married, but now I'm not so sure. Oh, girl. 3 weeks ago, I noticed something really weird. Every time I tried to reach for his phone, he was always trying to take it away from me. Well, if that's not a red flag, I don't know what is, because he shouldn't be hiding his cell phone from you. I asked him what was happening and he told me that I shouldn't be trying to check his phone, that I should just trust him. We had been together for so long and he had never said this to me before. We've always had an open policy with our cell phones, so for him to tell me not to check his phone was extremely weird. I thought maybe he was cheating or that he was trying to talk to somebody online. That's when he said that I was just overreacting. I did not want to start a fight, so I decided to let it go. Instead, I waited for him to fall asleep, and this is when I found the most grotesque thing ever. Let's prepare ourselves. When I opened his camera roll, I saw a folder that said private. I clicked on the folder, and that's when I saw a bunch of nudes, his junk, and his back. I was stunned. He had never till this point sent me that type of picture. I went straight to our bedroom and woke him up. So I grilled him. I asked him who he was sending the pictures to, and that's when he said nobody. Oh my gosh, the gaslighting. Does anyone else have dry eyelids? Because mine are dry. For the next 3 hours, I did not let him leave the bedroom. I threatened him with everything I could think of. He had gotten laid off from his job, so I was technically paying for the entire amount of the rent. I also threatened to call his parents and tell them. They are extremely religious, and this is what did it. Finally, after 3 hours of threats, he confessed that he had an OnlyFans, and that the only reason he started his OF was because he was sick and embarrassed of having me pay for all of his bills. He explained that he had only been on the app for about 3 months. So I asked him, if you really only did it because you wanted to help me out financially, why aren't you paying for the bills? And how much money are you making? The first month he was on it, he made $500. The second month he made $3,000. That's a lot, damn. And the third month he made $2,000. To be honest, what made me most upset was the fact that he wasn't helping me actually pay for the bills, but he was selling his ass online as the excuse as to why he was doing it. Then I forced him to show me his bank account. This is when I saw that he had been spending all that money, not on me or bills, but on himself. That's when I saw on his bank account that he had been spending all his money on clothes, restaurants, and technology. There was one restaurant bill for $600. When I asked him why that bill was so big, he said that he had gone with friends. The thing is, I know all of his friends because we run in the same group. So for him to lie about this is extremely stupid, and I agree. So I told him I would call our friends to see if that was actually true. That's when he breaks down and starts to cry and says that he actually went on a date. He went on a date with another OF girl. This is when he tells me that the agency he's with for OF asked him to go on a date with another one of the models and that they want them to start an OF together. After he explained everything, he swore that he would help me pay for the bills. At this point, our rent was $2,000 and that he would pay for all the groceries. All I would need to cover was half the rent and all of my own expenses. Wow, he is so ungrateful. So you mean to tell me you've been paying for rent this whole time? I forgot to mention that we had been living together for 6 months. So for 6 months, I had been paying all of the rent and all of the food bills because he didn't have a job. He swears that he's with me because he loves me, but I think it's the opposite. He said he couldn't quit because the money was too good. I asked him to at least not work with the other girl that he went on a date with. He said that he probably needed to because he was under contract with his agency. I became physically ill and had to leave the apartment. When I got there, I explained everything to my parents and they were mortified. They called his parents and told them everything. His parents disowned him and nobody in his family is speaking to him. I'm so torn. I really do love him and I really thought that we would be together forever, but I'm at a point where I'm so jealous and so insecure. He doesn't care about you. He's not concerned with how you feel. Has he asked you how you felt?
Storytime about how my stepdad made my mom choose between him and my brothers. So a little background information, I was 13 years old and in 7th grade, and I had 2 older brothers, Josh and Alex, who were twins, and they were both 4 years older than me. Whenever I was 3, my dad left my mom for his dentist, and we never saw him again because he decided to start a whole new family with them. Now, because of that, my older brothers always felt like they had a specific role in my family, especially because the guys that my mom brought home, they would only last a week. Well, finally, my mom met this guy who's really nice, and she decided that she was going to get married to him, but he despised my older brothers. Mainly because before he moved in with us, my mom would not depend on him for anything. Anything that needed taken care of around the house, my brothers would do it. And we didn't have too much money while this guy was loaded, Like the one time my mom and this guy, who we're gonna call Jerry, got into a fight. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my stepdad made my mom choose between him or my brothers. So like I said, my mom and Jerry got into this one fight, and it's a super long story, but pretty much all it made Jerry realize was that he did not have authority over my mother, and she didn't have to depend on him for anything because my brothers would always be there for her. Now, Alex was more of the shy one. Meanwhile, Josh was super hot-headed and didn't deal with anybody's bullshit. And fast forward, my mom and Jerry move in together. That's when we realized that Jerry was super abusive. And Jerry knew that he could pick on Alex whenever he wanted because he wasn't going to do shit. And most of the time, Josh wasn't home because he literally hated Jerry. The one time Alex came home and he did really bad on this one test. And Jerry was like, oh, he needs to learn discipline, blah, blah, blah. The next day, we all were sitting down for breakfast and we saw Alex come downstairs with a black eye. And that's whenever Josh flipped the fuck out. He grabbed Jerry, ripped him across the fucking table, and threatened him with a kitchen knife. And my mom called the cops, like for part 3. Part 3 about how my stepdad made my mom choose between him or my brothers. So like I said he needed to teach some discipline, so he literally beat the shit out of Alex. And we all didn't know until he came downstairs the one morning for breakfast. And that's whenever Josh flipped the hell out. He threatened Jerry with a knife. After that, my mom called the cops. I didn't really do anything but try to de-escalate the situation. But after that, Jerry called a family meeting down to the kitchen table. And he was like, I will not deal with this level of disrespect in this house. He was like, you need to choose between me or them. She was like, well, I'm not going to choose between you or my kids. And he was like, well, then you need to choose them leaving the house. They're about to be 18. They can leave and get their own place. So my mom ended up choosing Jerry because Jerry had a lot of money. And my brothers weren't really that mad about it because it got them out of the house. And my mom would send them a lot of money every month. And Jerry never knew about it. But now instead of him being abusive towards my brothers, he's way more abusive towards my mom.
My husband forced me to watch him doing it with another woman. Disclaimer is not my story time with me on Instagram. I'm an overweight 28-year-old. My husband hates the fact that I'm fat. He and I dated for 2 years before he asked me to marry him. At this time, everything was pretty much okay. We had a lot of fun together. We were basically best friends. But after we got married, I ended up gaining some weight. Mostly because I wasn't really taking care of myself and because I've never cared about gaining weight or not. But to my husband, this is horrible. After I gained 20 pounds, he started saying things like, you're starting to look different and I don't like it. I can see your belly when we're having sex. And I gained another 20 pounds. And this is when he was really grossed out. If I asked him for a towel while I was showering, he would just throw it at me. Because apparently the sight of my naked body disgusted him. After a few weeks, I asked him to stop talking to me that way and he said that he wouldn't because he didn't marry a fat woman. But I think he should love me no matter what. Even if I'm fat or skinny, he should still love me. He got to the point where he wouldn't even touch me or kiss me good morning or good night. And we used to have a pretty active sex life. Things got way worse. He started not coming home. Part 2 is up. My husband was so disgusted by my body that he couldn't stand the sight of me naked. This is when he stopped coming home some nights. The next day that he would finally arrive, he was always drunk and extra mean. I would ask him where he went and he would say I was at the bar with my friends. And by friends, he meant his coworkers. And by coworkers, he meant his work wife. At this point, I had to take my makeup off, you guys, because it was way too cakey. Even my brother said it looked bad. I knew about my husband's work wife because at every work event, she was always there and she was always trying to be so nice to me. He would say things to me like, oh, he better be treating you right. You're so beautiful. But the whole time I know my husband's more attracted to her than me. This woman was really fit too. She loved the gym and my husband and her had that in common. This is when I started becoming more and more jealous. Every time he stayed out with his friends, I would ask him where he went. Finally, he confessed one night that he had been hooking up with his coworker and that it served me right. He told me my body was so grotesque that he gagged every time he saw me naked. Yeah, my own husband is telling me that. But instead of reacting like a normal person and leaving him, I decided to get even fatter. I ended up gaining another 15 pounds. And this pissed him off even more. It made me happy to piss him off. Part 3 is up. My husband forced me to watch him do it with another woman. Disclaimer is not my story time, send me on Instagram. This is when I gained another 10 pounds just to piss him off. In retaliation, he started kicking me out of our bedroom at night. If I would get into bed, he would literally kick me off the bed. That's when he told me that I needed to go downstairs and work out, or at the very least, stop eating. At this point, I knew that he had been having an affair with his work wife. So I decided to ask him directly. He had no shame in telling me that he was having an affair with her. That's when he started saying things like, her body is way better than yours. He even said that he was more than happy to bring her over so that I could meet her. And that's what he did the very next day. He brought her to our house. I expected her to be on my side and tell him absolutely no. Instead, she started calling me names as soon as she came into our house. She started referring to me as the fatty. Suddenly, they started getting naked. And I just watched. Part of me couldn't believe it. I was frozen in time. While they were getting it on the couch, I was sitting there crying. The whole time my husband is calling me a pig. When they were done, they left. 2 days later, he asked me for a divorce. But I don't want to give it to him. He'll have to die married to me. What should I do?
Okay, part 2. So like I said, I look in the mirror and I see myself smiling back at me. And that's whenever everything went south so quick. I sat on the bed, tried to pull myself together because I didn't want to make a fucking scene in front of everybody. But then I got caught in this fucking loop. And if you don't know what the loop is, then I'm going to tell you what it is. It's basically where you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then I started looking around at everybody and it looked like their faces were melting. One of my friends got up off his chair, walked to the other side of the room, and I watched him do that. But when I looked back over at the fucking chair, he was still sitting there. So I looked at my one friend that was sober, who I was actually really close with, and I think he saw the look in my eye and he was like, "Do you want to leave now?" And I just shook my head, yeah, like I could not deal with that shit anymore. So we go to his car and then we drive to my boyfriend's house. Because I could not go home. I would have got crucified. Well, we get in the house and as soon as his mom sees me, she knows that something's wrong. Like for part 3.
Okay, part 3. So like I said, I walked in and she knew that something was wrong with me right away. Because she was like, "Oh, I have a letter from your boyfriend." And usually I would run up, grab it, read it really quickly, because I would only get like 1 letter a week. But instead I ran downstairs because her face was fucking melting. So 5 minutes later, she has to come downstairs and help me get dressed into my pajamas because I forgot how to dress myself. I didn't want to be left alone that night, so my friend stayed in the basement with me. So he went and tried to go to sleep, but he couldn't because I was watching Butterfly Effect for 8 hours straight. Like that was the only thing that could calm me down. But I still don't even know all the freaking words to it, which is weird. Like he would try to change the video and somehow I end up back to Butterfly Effect. And then he tried to kiss me. So he left the next morning because he had to go to work, which was at like 11 a.m. And I took this tab at 8 p.m. the day before. So I was getting texts like, "Where are you? You're supposed to be home now." So I had to go home and act normal in front of everybody while I'm still tripping balls. And I also got grounded for coming home late because I could not come home at the right time because I was tripping so hard. And this lasted for about 24 hours.
Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I come from a really big family. My mom has 5 sisters and 1 brother, and my dad has 4 brothers and sisters. All of them have their own kids, so I have a lot of cousins. And this means we have a lot of family get-togethers. Every single weekend, someone is hosting a party. We all get together and eat, and it's actually a really nice time. But there's always that one creepy uncle. In my case, it's my mom's brother. He's 46-year-old and has never married, but he's a bachelor. He's got money, so he basically has a bunch of sugar babies. Whenever my family tells him that he needs to get married, he says he'll never get married to anybody. He thinks women only exist for the pleasure of men. When I turned 16, I noticed that he would stare at me a lot. At first, it was just staring. Every now and again, he never did anything really creepy then, but just the staring was enough for me. I never told my mom about it then, not until I turned 18. This is when he started making comments like, "Wow, you're growing into your body," or "Wow, you got great hips." He would make comments about how I was growing up, like, "Ew." He even told my dad that he needed to keep me away from guys because I was growing up really quickly. And because of my curves, men would think that I was a woman. This is when I finally told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable. She thought it was funny at first, so I avoided him at all costs. Part 2. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. When I told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable, she laughed it off. She thought it was funny. She said, "Oh, you know how he is." So from that point on, I basically avoided my uncle every time we were at a family event. When I turned 20, this is when things got even worse. He would ask me things like if I was a virgin, or if I had a boyfriend, if I had ever been on dates. And one time he even told me that he would get very jealous if I ended up bringing a guy to one of our family events. One time he complimented me on the dress that I was wearing, so after that, I only wore baggy clothes to family events. The fact that I had to change the way that I dressed so that he could control himself makes me sick. I finally told my mom again that my uncle was always bothering me. It's when she told me that the world is filled with men like him, and that all I needed to do was just ignore him. So I told my dad everything. My dad took it a little more seriously and told my uncle that he needed to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I finally told my dad and he told my uncle to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed and told my dad that he was overreacting. And that all he said to me was that I was a pretty girl. What a liar. In part 1 and 2, I told you guys that it was getting worse, but here's where it actually gets even worse. Like I said, I have a really big family, so my cousins are growing up too. One of them just turned 13 and my uncle cannot stop staring at her. She's maturing a lot quicker than most 13-year-olds. He's already staring at her. So here's what I did. At the next family event, I sat right next to him. Every time he would stare at one of my cousins or try to make a comment at me, I called him out for it in front of everybody. I even recorded the things that he said. The fact that I even have to do this at a family event makes me sick. Instead of enjoying my time with my family, I have to sit next to my creepy uncle policing him. Anyway, it's totally worth it though. I'm making sure that my cousins don't feel uncomfortable. After I had enough recordings of him saying nasty things, at the next family event, I showed it to my grandma. I basically played it for the entire family. My grandma told him that he couldn't come to any more events if he was going to behave that way. And of course, he apologized to everyone right away. But not to me, he apologized to my dad. After his half-ass apology, he was let back into family events. I don't think that's enough punishment. Give me some ideas because I think I deserve justice. Creepy uncle.
Story time about the girl who used me to get with my guy best friend. So a little background information, I was 15 and in 9th grade. Well, at the end of summer, right before school started, this girl named Liv added me on Snapchat. And I had seen her all around school. She was very popular and a little bit stuck up. But I added her back, and then I got a call on Snapchat from her. I answer very awkwardly, and I'm like, hi? And then she was like, oh, I've seen you in a lot of this guy's pictures. Are you guys like best friends? And I'm like, yeah, sort of. And she goes, have you ever thought about dating him? It was just an extremely weird, out of nowhere conversation. Anyway, so fast forward 2 weeks, I walk in the first day of school with my best friend Tommy, and Tommy and I have like every single class together. For some reason, Liv thought that we were friends, and she would come and go as she pleased. Like Tommy and I would be standing at my locker. She would come over. Anyways, fast forward to chemistry. She walks in the class, winks at Tommy, like for part 2.
My dad catfished me into going on a date with him. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, I'm sending me on Instagram. So I matched with this really cute guy. He has my literal same interests. Just from looking at his profile, we had so many things in common. Of course, I reached out and he asked me out on a date that very same day. 2 days later, I show up to this beautiful restaurant. It's an outside setting, it's candlelit, beautiful bossa nova music playing. Throughout the sea of people, I see one man sitting by himself. His back was facing to me. But I thought surely this cannot be my date. He looks frumpy and really slouchy. Nothing like the guy that I had been talking to. And as I'm walking towards him, he looks back. And to my horror, it is my father. And that's when he asked me, what are you doing here? I say, what are you doing here? He says, I'm on a date. I said, well, I'm on a date too. With a guy named Larry. And my dad starts cackling. He proceeds to spill the beans about his catfishing ways. So when I asked him why he would want to catfish his own daughter, he said that he actually didn't recognize me from the pictures. That he was messaging so many women, he didn't really take the time to look at my profile. I was so weirded out, but I decided to sit down and question him further. What you are about to hear is a true story. At this point, my dad had catfished 30 women. Part 3 is up. I matched with my dad on Tinder because he was catfishing me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's that I'm on Instagram. My parents got divorced only 2 months ago. My mom was so done with my dad. She served him divorce papers on a Friday, and the next Monday they were divorced. Okay, truthfully, and this is so shameful to say, but my dad is a little bit narcissistic, so I completely supported my mom in the divorce. A couple of weeks after the divorce, my mom started going out on dates. She downloaded every single dating app I could think of, and she was having the time of her life. And then of course my dad finds out she starts going on these dates. He got so jealous that he came to our house at 5 in the morning banging on the door, demanding that she delete the apps. She kindly reminds him that they're divorced, so he has no business asking her. But what do you think my dad does? He downloads every single dating app too. The problem is my dad is not, he's not a looker, you know? He's bald, bit stubby, he has never exercised a day in his life. And I guess this is when he got the bright idea that he should just catfish people. So he thought he should go on Instagram, find a random hot guy, steal all of his pictures for a dating profile. But the thing is, it worked. Can you imagine getting catfished by a 60-year-old man, thinking you're gonna meet a 20-something-year-old? And that was my dad. But it gets worse. I ended up matching with him. Part 2 is up. My dad catfished me into going on a date with him. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's letting me on Instagram. After he confesses his catfishing ways, he also tells me that he's catfished 30 women. That the only reason he catfished me by mistake was because he didn't recognize my pictures on the profile, which was weird. But let me remind you, my dad is a narcissist, and to him, this was all funny. But get this, out of the 30 women that he catfished, only 2 of them confronted him about the catfishing. You mean 28 women sat on a date with my dad and either didn't realize that he was catfishing them, or did, but didn't want to say anything? And this is why men like my dad just get away with stuff like this. But it gets worse. He actually went home with 3 of those girls. And apparently one of them is totally obsessed with him. My dad is in his 60s. All these girls are in their early 30s. And as he's telling me all of this, he's just laughing, as if he's not talking to his own daughter. After 20 minutes of listening, I went back home with my mom. And of course, her and I both reported his account. And I've officially cut off my narcissistic dad. It was so weird that he said he didn't recognize my account. Why in the world would he want to go on a date with his own daughter? And to the 3 girls that went home with my 60-year-old dad, are you guys okay? If you ever get catfish, you better walk away immediately. Bye. My father-in-law is forcing my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time, and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup today. My husband and I have been married for 2 years. Now, we did get married very, very young. By very young, I mean I was 18 and he was 19. When we started dating in high school, his dad was totally against the relationship. See, my husband was super popular. He played on the football team. All the girls chased him. He also played basketball and was perfect at everything he did. As you can imagine, was extremely strict with him. He was not even allowed to go out on weekends. Me, on the other hand, my parents are pretty much hippies. They let me do whatever I want. We're all very spiritual. My parents have full trust in me. Because of this, I make smart decisions. I actively seek my parents' advice. I even told my parents I lost my virginity when I did. And we had a big conversation about it. It was not dramatic. It was not like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. They just support me in everything I do.
Now, my husband's parents are not the same. They tell him not to do a lot of things. They try to control him. So as we were dating in high school, his dad kept telling him to break up with me. He claimed that I was holding him back and that because of me, he spent less time training. Which technically, yes, is true. But at the same time, you cannot stop your son from experiencing human relationships. In fact, he actually broke up with me for 2 weeks. But then we got back together in secret. Everything culminated when he asked me to marry him right after graduation. His parents were absolutely against it. But my parents were all for it. You guessed it, go to part 2. My father-in-law wants my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time, and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup. When he asked me to marry him right out of high school, his parents absolutely freaked. They went to my parents' house and told me off for saying yes. In other words, they were completely blaming me for the whole thing, as if their own son didn't go buy a ring and ask me to marry him. He even did a beautiful proposal, which he had been planning for months. But at this point, his parents didn't even know that we were boyfriend and girlfriend. When they came to my house, his mom, my now mother-in-law, started crying and yelling at me. She told me that I was ruining their family, that I was trying to steal her son, and that all I really cared about was their money. By the way, my parents were middle class, but we were not destitute. His parents are very rich. They own several businesses. But of course, I'm not after their money. That's when they said that if we did end up getting married, I would have to sign a prenup. And I said, yeah, I want to marry him because I'm in love. At this point, his parents knew they couldn't stop us. We were going to get married with or without their approval. But thankfully, his parents came around and let us get married. We had a quaint, small wedding. It was so magical. But his parents wanted him to go to college to play football. In other words, they wanted him to be the next Tom Brady. They made him train for hours, and they didn't even let us live together for the first year we were married. And because they were supporting him, he couldn't say no. They had us on a schedule. Could only see him for about 2 to 3 hours a day. And we were married. 2 years later, he's playing for a football team. But his parents keep thinking that I'm dragging him down. So now they're trying to convince him to leave me. Go to part 3. My father-in-law is trying to convince my husband to divorce me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, and this is the final part of the 3-part story time. I'm doing a full face of pink makeup. After a year of us being married, his parents did not allow us to live together because he needed to focus on football. So obviously, I was living with my parents. I was focusing on my own studies, but his parents did allow us to see each other 2 to 3 hours a day. Now, you might think my husband is a total pushover, but let me explain something. His parents paid for all of his training and his entire college tuition. They gave him the best of everything. He got sports massages every single day. They even installed a cold plunge in their backyard. They also had a full gym setup where he and his teammates would go work out every single day. In their house. Obviously, he did not have time for little old me. After a year of this, I couldn't take anymore. I wanted to be with my husband. So I gave him an ultimatum. That he tell his parents that he and I wanted to live together. That's all I wanted. I was even willing to pay for half of the rent. And he told his parents, they said fine. And they bought us a house. Obviously under my husband's name, not mine. Fast forward another year up until now. I've heard his dad tell him on several occasions that he needs to divorce me. That he could find a much prettier wife once he becomes bigger in the NFL. And I walked in on his mom telling him that maybe I can't even have kids. And that he should have me checked. My parents-in-law hate me. I sometimes feel like I am holding him back. They make us miserable. My parents think I should just walk away from the marriage, but I'm too in love. Should I confront my parents-in-law? Help me think of what I should say to them.